Welcome to the Ballerinas podcast, Cindy. It is so nice to have you here. Finally, we've been trying to do this for a
Yes.
while now. Let's just jump straight in. Can you
Yes.
please start by sharing your journey into dance education, and what led you to create Class for the Heart?
Okay. So I actually started dance quite late. I was 13 years old, which usually people are, they're three and they're in ballet. That was not me. I learnt all genres. I did the exams. I was back in the day when you did tap, jazz, ballet, acrobatics, everything had an exam. Moved into then professional work. So I think I was very fortunate enough to work as a professional up until I was about 30, but started to think, what am I going to do when I retire? From or hang up the fishnets, I used to say.
Hang up the
And I
fishnet.
guess I wanted, yeah, I guess I wanted a little bit of security. So for me, I knew I wanted to do something dance, but I went into teaching, but in a high school setting. So in Queensland, when I did that, you had to do an education degree, a dance degree. And so for the last 17 years have been teaching mostly in a high school setting, which I actually really love because I feel like you learn performance, but you also learn choreography, you learn
Mm,
history, you learn analysis. It's like a really holistic type of education. I think that also happens in certificate courses too, where it's not just the performance aspect.
yes.
And then I guess somewhere along the way, I found yoga. And I was kind of angry. I did a 30-day challenge, and at the end of it, like I felt amazing, but I was angry that I'd never been shown that as a student of dance or as a teacher, because I think the similarity or the goals in terms of physically what we're working for is the strength, the flexibility, mobility, but the approach is so different. It's that mindset, focus, and it's achieved through movement. So I started to include that into some of my warm-ups and conditioning classes that I was teaching. And students started to ask, oh, can we do that again? Can we do that thing where we finish lying on the floor? And I was like,
Mm.
yes, of course we can. And I am a person who I'm an advocate of continuing professional development. So I like to know the why and that I'm doing something according to a bit of science. So I went and got my yoga teaching qualifications so that I knew a little bit more. And I guess since then have been really passionate about embedding that knowledge into the dance community because you can condition mind and body at the same time and it can be calming and relaxing and enjoyable, but ultimately, so it is benefiting the mind. So that's kind of the Class for the Heart thing. Um, and then recently, as sort of an offshoot of that, moving more into the consent world. So you may have heard of the role of an intimacy coordinator and director. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have.
Yes. So would you like me to share a little bit in case people haven't?
I do, yes, because I think this is a great introduction into what we're talking about today, which is all about consent
Yes.
in the dance studio. So let's start
Yes.
there.
Okay. So um, an intimacy coordinator and director, it's a new role really within the film and television world. Theatre also and slowly starting to creep into dance. It's not fully embraced by everyone, but it's a new role. We have our union, MEAA, which is for entertainers, and they have guidelines for intimate scenes. And intimacy, by definition, is body contact between performers. So whether that is sexual or otherwise. So if you're in a scene where there is an adult holding a baby, there's going to be some touch there. So we want to make sure that there is some consent around how that baby is held, what is shown of the baby. If you've got romantic scenes like kissing, simulated sex, nudity, there's processes to ensure that the actors or the cast performing that only do what is within their boundaries. So essentially, for me in that role, I would talk to a director, find out their vision, you take that to the cast, You find out what their concerns are, how they think you can support them, whether they have any boundaries or limitations around that. And then you're working and collaborating with everyone, just providing support and offering some processes so that, again, we're moving past that. There's a vision of the
Mm.
director or the creative or the choreographer, and the performers, they're just going to do it
Yeah.
because it's everything for the vision. It's similar to, I guess, fight scenes and stunt work where things are choreographed so that there's no surprises, it's repeatable. And in stunt work and fight scenes, it's about physical safety. So in this type of work, it's more about emotional safety. So people are not being touched in ways that activates or triggers them or is something that is just not within their boundaries, basically. So
That's a great comparison. And I love that you use
yeah,
the example of the baby being held, because often I think sometimes when
yes,
we hear about consent or an intimacy coordinator or even just the word intimate, we think
yeah.
about, and typically we think of a man and a woman.
Mhm. Mhm.
No, we actually don't
Yes,
even think about woman to woman or man to man. Like we just
yes,
automatically jump to a man and a woman engaging in some kind of
yes,
intimacy. And so that was like a really
yes,
beautiful example. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, there's lots of other scenes like medical scenes. If you're, say there was a scene and it's bathing an elderly person, it's just
Mm,
basically any time that there's touch, it's let's just make sure that people are okay with that.
yeah.
So, yeah.
So today we are going to talk about consent within specifically, especially for this podcast, the dance studio,
Hmm.
because it's a space I'm in. I'm
Hmm.
going to be very selfish, and
Hmm.
tell you that one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about this is because I feel I'm in the abnormal camp in regards to the amount of touch that I give my students. So,
Hmm.
for example, and it's really difficult because I put up, and I actually just tried to quickly scroll and find it. I put up a reel and I said, controversial opinion, teachers, because I just knew. I was like, and I also wanted to see what people really thought. And if you put something like that, people just can't help themselves and they'll comment.
Hmm.
I said, teachers who heavily rely on physical correction can be seen as lazy communicators. In today's age, respecting personal boundaries is key.
Hmm.
Correction should be minimal, respectful, and thoughtful. Now, there was 120 comments, which is quite a few. And
Hmm.
surprisingly, I found this so interesting reading through these. Surprisingly, the majority were either teachers saying, I completely disagree with you, or I've followed you for such a long time and I am just appalled. Like, teachers, you need to use physical touch, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm unfollowing you. I had a lot of adult ballet students saying, totally disagree with this. One said, I love when my teacher pokes, prods, and pulls me in the right direction. Now,
Hmm.
it was really
Okay.
interesting on so many levels because I found that teachers felt really attacked, that
Yeah.
and I think they felt attacked because personally, I feel like they were probably relying too much on physical correction. And
Hmm.
then we had all these students who wanted to be, and the words were poked, prodded, tapped, pulled,
Yeah.
nudged. And I was like, wow, I'm blown away. Like, I'm blown away because
Hmm.
I so don't teach like that. So don't teach like that. So that's why I want to have this conversation. I want
Yes.
to, like you, constantly evolve as a teacher,
Hmm.
constantly update myself. And yeah, I just want to hear in this conversation what, first of all, consent means to you in the dance studio. Why is it important? And
Hmm.
let's start with, how would you explain the broader scope of consent in, this setting that I find myself in?
Okay. So I look at consent in dance, it's just like in any other context. So
Mm,
it is ongoing communication where students can communicate their agreement or willingness to do something. Now, there's some acronyms that are often used. They come from Planned Parenthood. Uh, FRIES is one of them. So consent should be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. But we're talking about real relationships there. So it should be clear that that enthusiasm aspect should be there when you're talking about real relationships. But I can go to the dentist and I'm not enthusiastic about that. So in
I don't
other
think anyone is.
contexts, no, but I'm fully consenting.
Mm,
So when we're talking about consent in other aspects, and what is coming out in the performing arts world is a different acronym, which is CRISP. So consent is considered. You've got to have time to think about what it is you're consenting to. Again, it's still reversible, it's informed, it's specific, but there's participation. So there isn't the enthusiasm because it's acknowledging and welcoming challenge. It's not like everyone has to feel like rainbows and sunshine and lollipops all the time,
mm,
or the minute something's difficult, oh, a boundary's been crossed and I'm not consenting.
mm.
But it's different. So that is what I say for anyone wanting to add consent to their practice in a very specific way or purposeful way, really trying to remember that acronym. We have to acknowledge that really parents are the ones who ultimately they have the yes or no in terms of like
100%.
what we're talking about. It's not like a legal consent, but it's that students having a voice. And I sort of am a big one. Often definitions of consent will talk about permission, but it's not. So permission is a one-off. And the example I always use is usually studios will ask parents, is it okay for images to be taken throughout class, for them to be used? And there will be an explanation of what they're used for. That's asking the parent, not even the person whose image it is. So
True,
that's
yeah.
not consent. And it's the one off, it's the beginning of the year where consent, if we're looking at it as a process and it's ongoing, you would be showing the student and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this? This is the actual image. And I don't think it appears on all dance studio Instagram pages and not yours. But
Thank
a
you.
student may not want the crutch shot for the world to see. So how
Yeah.
about we ask them? Because
Yeah.
it's out there, it never goes away. What happens after it's on there? We don't know. So, yeah, for me, it's that asking the students and giving them a voice over what happens to them, not making assumptions that just because that's how it's been done for years, then that's what has to happen. And also understanding that there are layers of power over the students we teach. You might be the favorite, you're the connection to the industry, you're the one who picks the routines or the duo. So it's difficult to say, I'm uncomfortable with that or no. And it is that assumption that when you're in dance, you just get touch. But it
Yes.
doesn't have to be that way. There are alternatives. And if we're catering for difference, we have options. And
Mm.
we can use touch for students who really like and want that, but we do have other options as well. It's not the only default that we go to.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important because, particularly with what's happened recently with things in Australia here in the news about studios and whatnot, um, I think we've got an opportunity if we actually do teach consent. We can be teaching another aspect. Like we know we already do. We teach discipline and commitment, but if we're purposeful about teaching consent and including it in our class, then we're teaching that as well. Like
Yeah.
that's amazing, not just in a token. Uh, I shouldn't say not just in a token. Like schools now have to study consent,
Yeah.
but it's the real relationship aspect of it. And I think sometimes it's an assessment item and it's a unit of work. We do have the opportunity to teach it every day, every lesson, and students take that knowledge beyond the class into
Yeah.
their real life. So that's why I think it's important, as well as it just reduces that emotional harm. We don't know our students' lived experiences. We don't really know their cultural backgrounds and the limitations and boundaries in relation to that. We don't know if a touch might activate or trigger someone.
Some
So,
kind of trauma or something. You don't know.
yeah. we don't know. So yeah, I think it's important also because industry practice, that's the way it's slowly heading. So yeah, so many reasons to, I think, be on top of or thinking about what is my approach? How do I obtain consent? Do I purposefully include it in dance? So
So
yeah,
tricky, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
maybe I'm naturally just not a super hands-on teacher. Do you know what I mean? So I've found
Mhm.
this relatively easy to think about the future and where consent is going and start already implementing practices. But I guess if you, giving these teachers that got really angry at me the benefit of the doubt, like if you are a physical,
Mhm.
teacher that loves getting hands-on and down and dirty with the students and, getting that turnout happening, that's probably not the best phrase, but you know what I mean. I
Yes.
I fully get how that would be really difficult to start working more on your language and the way you explain things
Mhm.
as opposed to showing. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
It's tricky.
Mhm. Yeah. But
How
I
do
am
you, yeah,
actually like I am an advocate for um touch. But in a
yeah,
way, like I was very like I'm very hands off as a teacher, but I
mm,
think there's also been other I was speaking to another teaching friend who said there's a syllabus she's working with, and they are very explicit about no touch.
mm,
And I think sometimes maybe there's policies implemented about, yeah, we do not touch.
yeah,
I think, as I was talking before, it's a missed opportunity for our students to practice communicating no, yes, not today. Yes, but I need this instead. Maybe if you could do this, like we're missing an opportunity.
mm,
And when we make the decision that we're not going to touch, it's the opposite of consent because we're the person in power making the decision for the person
yeah.
who may really learn and want to learn in that way. So I think it's balance and just not having that one definite approach that this is how it's got to be.
Yeah.
It's having tools.
Comes back to exactly what this whole podcast is about. And it's just a balance. Like it is really a balance
Ah,
in the
yes.
studio and
Yes.
reminding ourselves that every student is different. Because even though I've said what I've
Mm.
said, I still do use physical corrections. I'm just very
Mhm.
mindful about the way I go about it, and they are very minimal.
Mhm.
Um, but some students love that and thrive on that. And
Mm.
others are
Mhm.
like very much, I feel like you can really, even though consent is quite verbal and you should be asking, you can tell a lot by body language. Do you agree?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, so this is related again to the real relationship stuff. We have had changes to our consent laws, and
Mm,
they're now affirmative consent laws. And I believe it occurred because there was a situation between two people and there was not a verbal no. And so essentially, we can't assume that because someone doesn't say no that they are consenting or because they comply, they are consenting. So those affirmative laws are now, yes, you do want verbal something or an action. So I do think sometimes it is that if someone smiles or
mm,
nods, like
yeah.
that's also, and that's as simple and as quick as it can be. I
Yes,
think
because it's so hard, isn't it?
sometimes,
Yeah.
yeah,
The music's playing, you're trying to give a correction
yeah,
quickly,
yeah,
and you really have
yeah.
to just go on body language.
Yeah, yeah. But
Mm.
I think there are simple processes that it just allows choice, basically, is what you're doing.
Yeah. What are some really simple and actionable ways that teachers can introduce and maintain that culture of consent in their classes? So let's take, for example, being in an open adult ballet class where you're
Hmm.
not necessarily working with the same students all the time, and you've got some people
Hmm.
who are really familiar with the space and the teacher, and others who might be new. So that's a really
Hmm.
challenging space. What do you
Hmm.
recommend?
So I would first of all talk about consent and boundaries. and actually make that an explicit part of the conversation. Like in this class, we have a culture of consent, and I'm going to honor your boundaries. So one way could be this bar, stand over here if you're open to instructional touch or corrections. This bar, not.
Mm.
So already you've got people who are opting in or out of touch.
What if everyone runs to the bar that wants to be touched?
Then,
And then you've got one or two
then
people that feel a little bit like, oh, I don't really want that. But then they feel peer pressure to join that bar. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
yes, but I think it like with any culture, I think it takes time to develop. So
Mm,
I think it just slowly, if you're addressing it, talking about it from the first lesson,
yeah.
hope that over time it becomes a build and people understand that our boundaries, they do change. They're not always the same. You can have something that's happened where you're just like, yeah, I just, no one can touch me today. Or you have other things that impact that. So yeah, hopefully over time you'd have people shifting back and forward,
Yeah,
which would be the
true, true.
best thing because then you'd know, like you're really listening to what you need today. And today is yeah, I just hands off today. It's just not what I'm after. So yeah.
Mm. What are some, so if someone wasn't doing that and you're just walking around a class, what are some ways you can quickly ask for consent? What would you say? Like, say I wanted
So I
to
would,
fix somebody's position of their leg.
yes. So I would explain the what, the how, and the why. Okay. Um, Open questions as well.
Mm,
When you ask, can I, you're giving them the option of responding with a yes or no. So
yeah.
you've lost that spectrum of, yeah, however, or maybe
Yeah.
can you. So I would have like, what are your thoughts? Just moving your leg with my hand to assist in turnout.
Yeah.
Or if you know that maybe for an exercise, that's what you're going to focus on, you could front load that before the exercise. Okay, so um, I'm really going to look for turnout or your fifth position. So if I'm going to come and assist, it might just be, a turning of the foot gently. Again, it's that consideration, that C of the crisp. They've got time to think, yeah, yeah, that's okay for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
There,
you could opt in like during, hands up who wants some correction during this lesson or during this exercise. So you can just continually do the check-in
mm,
because some people might change throughout the
yeah.
lesson.
Yeah.
And it's not that you want like changing of bars 50 times
Mm,
but it is just that idea of building that understanding that it can change. And
yeah.
it's just increasing the communication, I think.
Yeah. Personally, because I think back to when teachers worked with me when I was younger and what I liked and what I didn't like.
Hmm.
And I've always thought as a teacher, even just the way you touch someone, like I know you're a listener of the podcast, you've probably heard me talk about teddy bear hands before. So I don't like fingers, like pointing
Hmm.
finger or like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm sort of like scraping as I do this motion with the finger or prodding. I'll do a soft open palm, flat
Hmm.
palm teddy bear hand if I need to
Yeah.
move someone into position. I
Yeah.
just find
Yeah.
that so much more comforting than like a poking.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I find that really helps as a teacher.
Yeah.
Makes people feel a bit more comfortable. I guess it's like a hug, isn't it? But your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like fingers.
No, no. I just
But you
maybe
do see it, like you see
yeah.
that when
Yeah.
people are posting online and you see, like a touch and
Yeah.
yeah.
I think about my teachers getting their like almost their fingernails pretty much. And that dragging, trying to turn out, Georgia, turn out.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I was like, I am trying my hardest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that scraping feeling, it was not very nice. Um,
No. And imagine if you could have opted in or out of that at
yeah,
different times, depending on how you
yeah,
felt. Like
yeah.
that would be amazing.
Many, many, many years ago now, I was teaching more of a body conditioning class. It was like a ballet technique class, and
Hmm.
my students were lying down on the mats. And I am in no means a perfect teacher, and that's why I'm telling this story. Um,
Hmm.
and it's especially surprising because I'm such a hands-off teacher, but I touched a
Mm,
particular student across the abdomen to try to activate her core. And
mhm,
I did it with my teddy bear hands and I thought I was doing the right thing. And she had this instant physical, the body language completely changed. It was like, no, don't touch me. And she said no out loud, like really loud.
mhm,
And I
mhm.
was like, oh, and I immediately backed off. And she said a few words to me, which I'm sure in the moment she probably was like, it was just a trauma response. Like I really didn't take it
Yes.
personally. Um,
Yes.
and then I just let her be for the rest of the class. I did ask her, I said, are you okay to continue class? You know, and she was like, I'm fine, I'm fine. And so I just let her be. I'm sure I'm not the only teacher who has experienced something like that. I mean,
Mhm.
especially if you're, teaching adults. How would you respond to that kind of situation? Like, what should I have done? Because I was very caught off guard. So, what
Hmm.
should I have said or done in that moment or followed up with?
Well, I think uh thanks for sharing your no, like thanking people,
Mm,
because it we are not
like
yet
that.
at that point where a no really is as good as a yes, which I think is really the aim, that eventually
Mm,
they are on par, because it isn't about you personally, it's about that person.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, moving away from just yes, whatever you need, because there's not many jobs, so I better just say yes to everything that comes my way. And the hierarchy, I'm the student, so I just say yes, that's what we
Yeah.
want to move away from. But I think understanding we are human, we make mistakes. So even with processes in place, boundaries are sometimes crossed.
Yes.
And so apologizing, sorry, checking in just like you did. Um,
I like
yeah,
that. Thank you for your no. That's really nice.
yeah, yeah. Any time. I've been on a film set recently where someone had to stop what they were doing and they were a little bit disappointed about, I think that, and that was the thank you for sharing.
Mm.
What I would say is, and a part of intimacy coordinating, which I haven't spoken about, is an offer to performers about how to regulate, because depending on the scene, depending on what's going on for them, sometimes there can be dysregulation. So having strategies of the breath work, or I've discovered lately like that bilateral stimulation, a sour candy. I love a sour
Mm.
candy to just bring students back into the moment. So that's a tool that is often offered to
Like
performers,
literally a lolly.
a sour candy or chocolate. A lot of actors love my sour candy because it just brings you straight back into your senses this moment right now.
Yeah.
And so for a student who might be having a bit of a traumatic response, essentially you're trying to regulate them. So
Mm.
yeah, the breath, the slow down, maybe in that moment or towards the end of the class, okay, yeah, we're just going to stand and just do a little bit of slow breathing. But then it's difficult because sometimes the stillness and the time to think can then
Yeah.
re-energize. It's so hard to know what to do. But yeah, some regulation strategies is something I think is also part of the consent work in a dance studio. Like if we're creating a routine that's really emotional, sometimes there's impact on the body. So can we offer ways for students to release release that character, release the performance a little bit? So
Mm. That's so
sour
true.
candy,
Sour
sour
candy.
candy.
Everyone just needs a little jar of candy in
Yeah, yeah,
there. I don't
it
allow
works a
eating in
treat.
my ballet studio.
Ah.
Um,
So everyone will just be doing
we'll
this.
be tapping.
Yes.
We'll be tapping,
Tapping and breathing.
tapping and breathing.
Yes.
I mean, you're obviously incredibly passionate about this area. How does this consent-based approach positively impact not just the students' experience, but I mean, I'm thinking as an entire culture for a studio.
Well, I think communication is better.
Mm,
You're teaching life skills. I mentioned it before. We do so much more in dance than just teach how to point feet and have a beautiful port de bras.
yes, we do.
So teaching consent and without, I don't think it's a can of worms, but we usually, in terms of a gender split, are usually heavier on the female gender and consent laws and what goes on in, like I think it's big stuff here that we could be doing beyond the classroom,
Yeah.
teaching young dancers, young female dancers largely, that people can't just touch you how they want, that there's got to be a conversation and that you can say no. And that if something comes up in your body, listen to it and respond. And you don't have to explain why. That's the other thing about if you're checking in with boundaries, people don't have to explain why it's a no. No, that's it. It's a full sentence. So that to me is, yeah, like it's so beneficial.
So important.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, we're releasing then, I mean, because most students, when they're reaching those teen years, and if you're part of, a studio like mine, you're here multiple times a week, and you become a really big part of their lives. And I think
Mhm.
you're so right. We do, and I express this all the time that we teach them so much more than dance within the four walls,
Mhm.
and adults too. I really believe with my adult
Mm.
students, I'm teaching them so much more than just ballet. And if we can have people not only leaving a little bit taller with better posture, but also a greater sense of power in who they are and their
Mhm.
boundaries,
Mhm.
that's pretty phenomenal and that's pretty amazing
Yeah.
work.
Yes.
It's really important, I think,
Yeah.
as body workers. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mm.
we work with
Yeah.
the body. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's something important that we should be teaching and setting
Mm.
an example.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. They're seeing consent in a best practice way. Like
Mm.
that's, and then they go out into the world knowing, oh, I can't assume when I'm interacting with people. So
Mm.
it's really powerful stuff,
Yeah.
which is why what I was saying before, when people are implementing a don't touch, it is a missed opportunity to do something really amazing. If we're doing it every class, we're having that conversation about, what are your thoughts today about some like, yeah, it's amazing, I think.
I know you love yoga, so you'll love this, but I do a lot of my anatomy training or bits and pieces through
Yes.
yoga schools and facilities.
Yes.
I love
Yes.
Byron Yoga Center.
Yes. That's where I did my
Yeah,
training.
yeah. Oh, it's so nice. I love it.
Yes.
Um,
The
and
food.
oh, the food's so good.
Yes.
Oh, so good. And I love switching off. I love the simplicity of those rooms there, like just your
Yes.
little lamp and your little cupboard, and it's just so
Yes. And you have to be quiet.
so
When I
quiet.
went there, it was you go into the
Yeah,
the room who you're sharing with, and it's like
yeah.
no one's really talking after us, and you're like, oh, okay.
I know. I found myself like just whispering the whole time I was there. I was like, thank you, thank you. I felt myself really soften. Um, my teacher voice had disappeared for the
Yes.
weekend. But anyway, I digress. What I was going to say was I feel like the yoga world does a really good job of consent. I've never been in a class, or maybe just I've been really lucky, but
Yes.
I've never, you're like, yes, I've never been in a class where there hasn't been really strong communication about consent. Like,
Yeah.
for example, okay, we're going to do, what's it called at the very end again? Shavasana. That's
Shavasana.
right. I had a mental block. So, Shavasana, end of class, pop your hands on your tummy if you would not like me to give you,
Hmm.
I don't know, a foot rub. Put
Hmm.
your arms by your side, open palms if you're open to,
Yes.
touch. I love that. It's so simple. I
Yes.
mean,
I've
harder
seen
to,
little dots on the
mm,
floor where they say grab a dot and or it's a dot and it can either side it determines whether you're open for that. But I
yeah.
was at a yoga class the other day and saw the teacher just, move someone.
Yeah, yeah,
So, but
yeah.
I do think it's more embedded than what it is currently.
Yeah,
And then,
I would think that it is more embedded consent in yoga than it is in a ballet class.
yes.
Um, yeah, for whatever reason. Certainly after this conversation, I'm definitely going to be even more aware, and especially talking to especially my younger students about,
Hmm.
consent and how if you're in a class, it's not appropriate if you don't want to be touched, like to be touched. So
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
okay to say no.
Mm.
But it's such a hard topic, isn't it? Because I mean, just finishing on a point, a lot of students and parents don't speak up because they feel that it'll be at the detriment of their progress in the dance world. I mean,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts there as we finish up?
It's it will take time
Mm.
for the change to happen. As I said, with the actual film and television industry, like people are not embracing at that point, even though there are guidelines, there are things within the US union about having intimacy coordinators on set where possible. Some people are still resistant because it's change, and people do assume it's going to take longer or it's like it's annoying.
And you get the eye
But
rolling and yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and change, no one really likes change. So I think, yeah, I guess thinking bigger picture. And when I'm working with actors, for example, where it might be the first time that they've been asked about their boundaries and are they okay with XYZ, it's like it is new probably for you to communicate, but you're part of the change. So you've almost got a responsibility. But understand it is difficult. If you are struggling speaking up, it's because of what's gone on for so long, but be part of that change. So I think parents can have those conversations around. And I think it's, as I mentioned before, with consent education in high schools, like students are using the word consent.
Mm. They
So
all,
it's coming. It's coming, but that explicit education of, oh, and it's not just real relationships, it's also in dance class.
yeah.
Someone can't just grab you how they want. There should be a bit of a conversation about that first. And you do have a right to say no if you wish.
I always think just as a teacher, and especially as a studio owner, I would rather be active than reactive. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't
Yes.
wait until something
Mm.
happens for you to then
Hmm.
address it and be like, oh, maybe we should have a child protection policy in place, or maybe we
Yes.
should talk to our teachers about, how to do X, Y, Z. Like
Yeah.
maybe we do that before something happens.
Yeah.
And I
And
think,
that's something. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I think as we were talking before this podcast started recording, I think that the dance world is becoming a little bit reactive with things that are happening
Mm.
at the moment. And
Mhm.
it would be great if we all just be a little bit more active um,
Mm.
in our
Well,
approach.
this all speaks to the national principles of the child or safe child
Yeah.
organization, those which every state now has, where you do have documents, for example. And I ask teachers who are maybe thinking it is painful. Like, what would you
Mm.
do? Because what we've mostly talked about is teacher to student touch, but what about student to student? I've been to
Yeah.
some amazing performances, professional year or
Yeah.
graduations, and you see sliding down bodies and you see so much connection, beautiful, meaningful, but you also need consent processes student to student. So, what would you do if there was a complaint from a student that says, well, during a rehearsal, I felt like there was inappropriate touch. I feel like I've been sexually harassed. Like, what would you do? Do you have a policy
Yeah. What
document?
policies are in place?
Yes. What would you do if you were then asked, how are you risk mitigating about that?
Mm.
So, yeah.
let's end on
But
something a little
yes.
bit lighter. What
Okay.
keeps you balanced, Cindy?
Well, I try to do my yoga.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to find more balance because I literally, like with all of this stuff, I go to bed and I wake up and I'm thinking about it and how can I do this? So I need to find balance, is what I'll say. But yeah, definitely, I'd say my yoga. But I also, and this is how I decide, oh, should I just do that more fun thing than the work thing is I do an 80-year rule. And I think when I'm 80, what am I going to wish I did more of?
Yeah.
And usually it's the one that is, okay, that's what you need to do. You need to have that fun and yeah, find a bit more balance. So that's
I,
something I often do.
I can totally relate. I mean, you're a little bit like me where you've got lots of ideas buzzing around in your head. You're incredibly
Yeah.
passionate about what you do.
Mm.
And that's really hard to switch off from. So,
Mm.
yeah,
Yes.
I can imagine
My
when you,
daughter said to me, are you ever not thinking? Because
yeah,
I'll just be like sitting down and watching, and I'll
yeah.
be like, are you ever not thinking? I'm like, oh,
Sometimes I wish that I wasn't. Yeah. Like, sometimes I wish my
yeah,
brain
just
would switch
bleh.
off. Yeah. And I found that it's been worse because it's so true that when you relax and you give yourself space to actually do things, say, for example, in my position, not dance related, like
Mhm.
playing outside with Bo and, doing Duplo, that's when your brain just goes bing, 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 bing with all these great ideas,
Yeah,
doesn't it? And so it's like, oh my God, just quieten down. Let me build my Duplo house. Like,
yeah,
so I feel you. I completely relate.
yes,
But I love that you have
yes,
yoga. Yoga's great.
yes.
Yes.
Everyone should have some sort of breath focused something. Tai Chi, I did that few weeks ago. That is the same. I found it really quite balletic, the beautiful
Oh,
movement, the
yeah.
breath, like
I watch them
that's
in
my
my
next favorite thing.
local park and I look at it. It's like a
Yes,
beautiful porta bra. Like, oh, it's stunning. Love
yes,
it. Mm.
yes. Amazing. So
Thank you
maybe I'll
so
get into
much.
learning Tai Chi.
Yes. No, thank you so much for making the time. You're currently in Toronto and it's a very late
Yes,
night there.
yes.
Yes, even though you're Australian, you're in Toronto currently. But yes, it's very late there. So I should let you
Mhm.
get to bed. But yes, thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate it that we finally got to make this happen.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'll talk to anyone who'll listen, basically.
Thank you.